Tēnā koutou katoa, te whānau o NZEI te Riu Roa. Nau mai ki te pātaka kōrero a Pareāwaha. Nau mai haere mai ko Liam Rutherford tō ingoa, ko te manakura o NZEI te Riu Roa. It's really great to be here with you all today. It's fantastic to see the interest in this important kaupapa. Pareāwaha is our series of online conversations and PLD opportunities. NZEI is really keen to be leveraging this online space to bring educators together under this kaupapa of by, for and with educators. Obviously, the timeliness of this conversation is really important, considering that we are hours away from the move to level 2, and that for early childhood centres and schools, we are expecting close to normal levels of students to be returning. And so I'm really excited to be joined by Professor Carol Mutch and Professor Peter O'Connor. And we're going to be talking about a website that they have launched, Te Rito Toi, but also the kind of evidence and research that is going to be sitting behind why this is such an important kaupapa. Immediately after this webinar, there's going to be a discussion question on NZEI Te Riu Roa Facebook page, which will be an opportunity to share and capture your ideas. And we would ask people using social media to use the hashtag NZEI conversation. And then later towards the end of the webinar, I'm going to be talking about some of the ways that you can be involved with hosting more localised conversations along these lines. Also, just letting people know that if anybody is having any industrial or employment issues, that our member support centre is well and truly up and running, and so you can contact them on 0800 693 443. But now I'm going to go and introduce our speakers. The format for today is that we're going to have a kind of 30-minute Q&A between ourselves. After that, there'll be an opportunity to use the chat function to be able to ask questions of Peter and Carol before we end up wrapping up. Now, this is going to be recorded and will be made available later. But it is with great pleasure that I introduce Professor Peter O'Connor. He's an internationally recognised expert in making and researching applied theatre and drama education. He's the academic director of the Creative Thinking Project, a multi- and cross-disciplinary research program that investigates nature and the application of creativity in everyday life. We also have Professor Carol Mutch. She's a professor of critical studies in education in the Faculty of Education and Social Work, and focuses her research on disaster response and recovery. She's also the Education Commissioner for UNESCO New Zealand. Both Peter and Carol have been involved in disaster outreach, in particular Christchurch, but also across Australia and China, as they have focused on the role of schools in disaster response and recovery. Carol and Peter, it's fantastic to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to our discussion over the next hour. I guess to kick it off though, I wonder if you just wanted to share some thoughts on what research tells us schools need when they look to reopen after or during an ongoing crisis.
Okay, well, I'm happy to start there. Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, thank you so much for turning up, and I hope you find what we have to say of interest. And that's an interesting question to open with. What is it that you should do once schools start? Well, I want to take you back a little bit further because, as Liam has already said, I've done disaster work post-Christchurch and around Asia and the Pacific since post-Christchurch. In fact, my husband calls me Dr. Disaster because it seems to be wherever there's a disaster, Carol turns up. But one of the things I did learn is that it's not just about what you do on the first day, it's about what you do to get ready for that. And so there's a couple of things you need to think about beforehand. One is thinking about what are the needs of your team. Now, I know that you're all amazing teachers, principals, teacher aides, and so on out there. and you'll be focusing on the children you'll have in front of you. But what I want you to think about first is, how are you going to support each other? How are you going to give each other an opportunity to talk about what lockdown was like for you? There'll be some of you for whom it was, easy, and you managed and you got through and you were able to spend more time with your children, or whatever. And there'll be others of you where it was really stressful. You were dealing with people in your family who may have had compromised immune system, or elderly parents, or trying to teach online while your children were running around your feet and so on. So I think it's really important that you get all of that out there. Don't carry it around. It just makes you frustrated. So how is your team going to engage in a way where you talk through what was good, what was bad, and then you're ready to move forward? So that's step number one. Then step number two has you going, what do we need to do before students come back? Now, I know that the ministry has put out material today that's about some of the things that you need to focus on, getting children back to school and how to, access hard to reach families. But I think that what students need when they go back to school is, it's not going to look the same. So trying to have it up and running and look like normal is going to be a really hard deal. They need to see things that are familiar. They've missed their teachers. They've missed their friends. They've missed their school. They've missed the playground. There's a whole range of things in which they need to have a sense before they come back that there are some things that they can connect to. So how are you going to do that? As part of your information that you're sending out to parents, are you showing them that some of those things will be the same and a few things might be different? So what are you doing to prepare them when they come, so that things aren't as surprising as they might be when they get off the school bus or they're dropped off at the school gate? So that's another thing to think about. And I think I'll stop there, because I know then Peter wants to start with what you do on day one. So Peter, off you go.
Well, I guess even before we start talking about that, the research is really clear that the focus should not be about catching up with lost work. That actually there's something about transitioning back into the physical environment. And so that means for me, and what sits behind everything that Carol and I did with Te Rito Toi, was to say the international evidence is really clear that it's important that the primary focus of schools when children return is on their well-being. And that's beyond their physical well-being, but it's around their spiritual, mental and social well-being, and that should be the primary focus. So that when children come back to school, they need to feel safe. They need to feel cared for. They need to feel loved. And that's really, really, really important. There are children who will be coming back who are really nervous about moving out of level 3 for a whole bunch of reasons. They'll be picking that up from their mums and their dads and their wider whānau. So that kind of sense that school is a safe place is really, really important. It's really important for parents to understand that. There's really important work, of course, for teachers in that going back and reassuring whānau and parents that when they come back, their kids are going to be looked after. I worked in Mexico City after huge earthquakes there. 6 weeks after the earthquakes, I was working in a school where only 30% of the children came back because mums and dads were too scared to let their little ones out of their sight. And that's the kinds of levels of anxiety that will be tumbling into classrooms all over the country next week. And so focusing on the things that primary teachers do so very well, relationship. We know that good teaching is about the kinds and qualities of relationships that we have with children. And working on that when we come back pays enormous dividends later on. So that's your primary focus in terms of what it is that you're doing with them when they come in. It's not about literacy and numeracy. It's not about catching up. It's not about all those kinds of things. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. There's things bigger and more important than catching up on what's been lost. Catch up on your relationship, strengthen the relationship, and base that on care and on the kinds of loving relationships that good teachers have with their classrooms. So absolutely. Don't feel that you need to go back to normal. You know, your classrooms, all learning should have been fun, right? All classrooms should have been highly interactive. But when you go back after a disaster, classrooms have to be fun, good places for kids to be in. And once you've got that, you know, Carol will know this from Christchurch, the Christchurch teachers were smart enough to ignore the advice from the Ministry of Education back in 2011, which was, you know, go back to school, focus on literacy and numeracy, kind of just get on with it. I wrote an article called The Pedagogy of Love and Care in 2013, and that describes Christchurch teachers and principals to a T. They went back and they worked out that the best way to deal with everything was through a pedagogy of love and care. And so that's what the research tells us really clearly. When you go back, get that right, and everything else will happen. NCEI results in Christchurch, they improved because teachers took their eye off learning intentions, learning objectives, literacy and numeracy and all the rest of it, and worked on relationships. Now, every teacher I reckon who's on board this call knows I'm right anyway. But what's lovely is the research says that's true. So, yep, that's I guess, my sense around that approach.
So I just want to pick up on one of Peter's points, and I know that you're all amazingly conscientious, and I know that you'll have parents asking the question, how will my child catch up? So I guess that what we're trying to do here is say that learning happens in a range of ways, and as Peter has said, coming back will be about talking to each other, getting to know each other, getting familiar with the environment, finding gentle ways into whatever you want to see, whatever you see as the curriculum. And I think that you've got a really good curriculum in front of you because they will have done amazing things. Now, some of them will tell you about things, it's the time they spent with their parents, or, you know, the particular activities that they were able to do at home. I mean, the stories I've heard from teachers where they did these amazingly creative things. And my grandchildren have been able to share some of the things that they've had to do, you know, showing us on Zoom, the making their name out of things they found at home, and all kinds of really interesting things. So there is a curriculum for you there as children come back and they talk about all those things. Because what your job is as a teacher is to sort of take a step back and kind of think about what is the learning going on here. You're already professionals, you know the curriculum, and you know where you'll be able to connect things, and you'll be able to take some of those things and build on them, and that will be your curriculum. Your curriculum will arise out of the conversations and the things that kids want to talk about and the pictures they want to show and all the excitement that many of them will bring back with them. But coming back to Peter's point as well, some won't be ready to talk. Some will be a little anxious and freaked out and not behaving in normal ways. And in no way should you ever put those children on the spot. Be really gentle about anyone who is exhibiting anxiety and so on, and find gentle ways to engage them in things rather than, you know, tell me what you did while you're in lockdown, because actually it might not be a story you want to hear or a story they want to share.
And one of the best and gentle ways to do that, and the research also supports this, which is why we were so excited about pulling Te Rito Toi together, is that one of the best ways back in is through the arts. And through the arts, because it provides a safe way for children to think through fiction. So you'll find on Te Rito Toi lots of picture books that you can use with kids with really deep kind of significant learning inside those picture books. Picture books which, for example, talk about why children are frightened of things they can't see. Picture books which are around why you follow rules, all the kinds of questions which children have without them having to talk about themselves, but use the arts as a way of doing that. The other thing, of course, and the research tells us that the arts are really important because they help us to name emotions and thinking and feelings and provide us access into that, where you don't have to talk necessarily about it, but you can do it through movement. through painting, through music, through a whole range of things. I was talking to a bunch of teachers this afternoon from a school in South Auckland, and I ended up by saying, on the first day, what would be wonderful is if you all sang. What would be, because singing and singing so wonderful, isn't it? To build a sense of community, to re-establish relationships, to have fun, to dance a little bit, to kind of just move and shake ourselves around in a way is absolutely vital. The other thing about the arts, which is great, is that I often find when I'm working with kids, when they're busy with their hands, all sorts of questions get asked. So sometimes it's around distracting them with kind of like, you're making this, and then they can ask huge questions like, my dad says we're going to lose everything. What does that mean? And while you're busy working with some Play-Doh, while you're busy painting something, while you're busy doing those other kinds of things, you can have the age-appropriate conversation privately and quietly about that with the children in your room. And that's absolutely vital, isn't it? So this whole business of while they're busy making something, you have an opportunity to come in alongside and work in those kinds of ways. Carol's got a part of Te Rito Toi, her picture book about a bear that's been in lockdown. It's extraordinary because you can use that story to ask all sorts of questions about the lockdown without asking them about their lockdown. And that's the beauty of fiction. It's the beauty of the arts. It's the beauty of that kind of approach. So that's what the research tells us. Find sideways in. Find the ways to open up the conversation. And the final piece to your question, Liam, about what do we know about things? Teachers are superheroes anyway, in my book. The best thing I ever did in my life 40 years ago was that, my wife would say the second most important thing I did 40 years ago was to become a teacher. It's the best thing you can be in your life. So you're doing, the stuff that you guys have done over the last 6 weeks, carried on, done all that. You're going to get 2 days off on the weekend, although most of you will be working anyway, and then you're in again. And the research is really clear. Teachers and principals carry the weights of communities. You carry children on your backs. You must care for yourself. And it's right back to Carol's first point. You're only useful to your children if you care and love yourself first. It's an absolute must. Carol can tell you the stories of the costs of carrying children for Christchurch principals and teachers. It's been enormous. We know that. We know that from all the literature. Don't lower your expectations of the children. Lower the expectations on yourself.
Yes, I wanted to come back to that superhero thing. We know you're superheroes. I wish the wider population would recognise that you're quite the superheroes that you are, but we're not putting it on you and telling you to act like superheroes. Your everyday teaching practice is super heroic. So we don't want you to do it at the expense of your own mental and physical health. And I know there'll be people who have tuned in here who did go through Christchurch, whether that's post-earthquake or post the mosque massacres. And I know there have been floods in other parts of New Zealand and bushfires and so on that people have had to deal with. And so we respect you as superheroes, but something stayed with me from the firefighters after the bushfires in Australia, where everyone said, oh, wow, they're heroes, they're amazing. And they said, please don't call us heroes, because that makes us feel as if we can make a huge difference when all we can do is the little bit that we can do. So that's an interesting twist on that idea of superheroes. Your everyday work is superheroes, but don't think that you have to go that extra mile at that, putting your own mental and physical health at risk.
My best advice is don't work this weekend. Drink a lot of wine on Saturday night, but not on Sunday night. Give yourself some space. Monday and the next couple of days are going to be really hard, but we know because of the economic dislocation, the poverty that will spread and kill as a result of this virus is long lasting. You know, we haven't had buildings collapse, we haven't had all that, but the damage to our communities is enormous and it will last for a very long time. You're in for the long haul. You know, I wish that wasn't the case, but that's the reality for all of us, isn't it? This is the long haul.
Pace yourself.
Pace yourself.
And
Don't go in full on Monday morning. Pace yourself. Yeah.
I mean, thanks so much for those introductory comments. I know that that message is going to be really reassuring to educators out there because I think it does align inherently with what people feel is the right approach.
Yeah.
I guess one of the kind of complexities of that, though, is actually where you start to get pressure from outside areas, and we know, and you've touched on it, pressure that could be coming from parent communities for a range of different reasons. Some is because they've been adversely affected by COVID, but also around the whole catch-up. My kids missed out. We also just had another one come through from the chat around Chinese community that has lived through SARS and some of the hesitation that they might have. Are you able to talk about some of the kind of external pressures that are going to fall on the education community and kind of responses through that?
What you're describing is really part of a wider kind of a push, which is around you get back to normal as quickly as possible, open the economy, do all those kinds of things. It's about saying, as a professional, as a community, as a school community, we're going by best practice, by the advice from the University of Auckland, who've said to us that re-engaging and learning after these things takes a while and you have to build that, and the best way back is through this. This is what the research, this is what the evidence is saying. It's not an either or, it's not a binary. You know, it's not focus on well-being and you leave the learning somewhere else. It's about saying to get to the learning in the most effective way, it's actually to have this other focus. It's a really difficult conversation to have. The pressure will be harder, I think, in secondary, where it's around the NZEI and a whole other range of kinds of pressures there. And you kind of pick that up. You also get principals who are kind of saying that's what it is that we need to do. I don't, to be honest, Liam, I don't know what the answer is around that community expectation. Maybe my colleague and friend Carol does.
Yeah, I was taken by the idea that someone had put up there about Chinese communities who've been through SARS. I mean, I guess we have to be careful that we don't give advice that kind of becomes a sort of blanket advice for everybody out there, because there will be a range of different cultural communities, there will be a range of different socioeconomic groupings and so on, where people will have had a range of different experiences. And so I guess you all know your schools best. You know your school, you know your school population, you know your community. Reach out to them. So find ways, especially if you have multilingual communities and so on, who are the people that you go to who can be your sort of open up access to these communities, so you can talk to them, you can engage them, you can reassure them that, if, for example, if it's the Chinese community or worried about SARS, then you can show these are the measures that we've got in place. You know, this is the best evidence we have from the health community. This is the best evidence we have from the education community. Just trust us, to know what we're doing and so on. And as I say, you know your communities, engage with your communities, communicate clearly to your various different parent groups and communities and so on. And if everybody doesn't come back on the first day, it's not a big deal. Just, again, it will be gentle. Find those gentle ways of re-engaging everybody in ways that they feel safe. And unfortunately, it's much harder for you. I've already had people say to me, yes, but after the earthquakes, you could hug everybody. After COVID-19, we've got a whole lot of physical difficulties that we have to come to grips with as well. So, we don't have the answers. As I say, we're sharing our experiences, and we'd love to be able to give you a little checklist of 10 things. If you do these things, it will all be great. But again, coming back to what do you do before you go, make as much contact with your communities and your families and reassure them that everything is going to be in place as much as possible. Talk about the kinds of activities that you're going to be doing. And if you have parents who expect that you will be getting straight back to the curriculum, then explain how the curriculum will derive from the experiences that they've had. And if somebody was doing kitchen chemistry, that will lead you into science. And if somebody else was doing some activity, that will lead you into the arts. And you'll be using picture books to unpack their experiences in safe ways and so on. So hopefully there's some things for you to think about.
It's a different take on the question, Liam. One of the things that's really kind of surprised me, and Perry Rush picked it up as principal of as president of the Principals Federation. We've been in a micro pause as we've gone back, and a lot of teachers who I've talked back have said to me, we don't necessarily want to bounce back to the way school was before with a range of priorities. That there's this chance that we might go back where we say that there's other things that matter more, that there are other parts of the curriculum that have been ignored, pushed to a side, that we're going to grab at again. So, we've had 150,000 views of Te Rito Toi in 2 weeks. And it's an extraordinary number of people literally around the world and interest in it. And it's part of this idea that we don't have to bounce back. We could actually leap forward into something else. We could actually go into schools which proudly said, well, actually, well-being, the arts, creativity, ways of being which aren't around assessment, that aren't dealing with the ghost of national standards, is the future that we want to embrace. That this might be the moment, I don't know about you, but I've been waiting to bust the crap out of the way schools have been for a really long time. We could go back differently. And what I find really exciting when I look at the numbers around Te Rito Toi and people going, my God, I could go back to school and use Māori arts. Ngā Toi. They're the first curriculum that supports Ngā Toi, Māori arts in this country for over a decade. You could go back to school and have kids explore the curriculum through Māori arts. First time in decades. It's kind of saying the world's changed. It's not about bouncing back to what we used to have. Let's take a leap into the future. And I just get this feeling sometimes when I talk to teachers and I look at what's happening on the site, that's what teachers are grabbing at. Yeah, because I think actually teachers know that's the right way to go anyway.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed the metaphor the Minister of Finance is using, that when your house burns down, you don't go back and rebuild it the exact same way. And you don't have to find too many people before you kind of like switch on to the idea that everybody's looking at the opportunities that exist in what we've come through and the ways to kind of rebuild education in a way that's more holistic and focusing on the needs of community and whānau. And that's a journey that certainly excites me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Couple of questions that have started coming through the chat. One is around what types of things we should be doing between staff to help keep an eye on each other's well-being through this.
Yeah, it's enormous. It's around noticing, isn't it? Because what I think it's often about is it's around change of behaviour, isn't it? That gregarious, bouncy kind of person comes back in, and it's kind of like, what's going on? It's actually about, it's what we want to set up in classrooms: safe places, safe spaces to talk about the kinds of things which some people have done this really, really hard. Like really, really hard, and we'll be doing it really hard. Carol can talk about the one. If you want to know how to do this, talk to Christchurch teachers. You know, like they left their homes with liquefaction up to their armpits and went into schools and taught. You know, they did all that kind of work, and how did they sustain themselves? And it was around the relationships that they built with their colleagues. Carol, do you want to talk?
Yeah, many of the things that came about were exactly as Peter said, they were about relationships. And so some of the things that we can pass on will be things about don't judge others, because you don't know what their life behind the scenes is like. One of the things that the research does tell us is that, you know, people who faced other traumas in their life that might be completely unrelated, anything that happens brings these things out again. And so that makes your colleagues who have been dealing with other things either back in their past or even in the more recent times and so on, is that you have to find supportive ways to listen to their stories and not judge. And so what I remember from Christchurch was that it came usually from the top. You know, a good principal sets up a really warm, caring, compassionate way of operating in the school and uses a senior leadership team to then kind of buddy up with a group of staff so that they can give them really focused, caring, listening support. Because there may be other things beyond emotional support that people need. So it could be that a partner of someone has lost their job and they're struggling to pay the rent or the mortgage or whatever. So there might be a whole lot of anxieties there. And so nobody wants to talk possibly in a great big circle, right? You know, here's the first day back at school, teachers all tell your story, but how do you find, again, just like with children, really safe ways that there's someone that they can trust, that they can share that with, and it can be, I don't want to say escalated to the top, but it can be taken seriously, and ways can be measures can be found in which those people can be supported. Another one of the things that we learned from Christchurch is there is not enough mental health support out there. There were not enough counsellors to go around. There were, as we know, it was 8 years after Christchurch before serious mental health systems were put into place in schools. We don't want that to be the case for now, because how are we going to deal with every school in the country who's had to face these things? So it's going to be a little bit of self-help and of looking after yourself, looking after your colleagues. Treat each other as you would treat your children, I think would be the way to do it. Be gentle, be caring, be prepared to listen, be prepared to support, find ways in which you can give each other a break. And how can you buddy up in ways that it's not always the same people taking the strain? So that would be my advice.
You know, one of the, earlier this year or last year, I worked with people who wrote a book called Headlands, creative people in New Zealand who live with anxiety, and I'm just watching the questions running through here around the anxiety levels that teachers are feeling. And it's really important that we kind of understand there's a level of anxiety which is kind of appropriate for where we are in the world now, and then there's anxiety which cripples and disables us to be able to function in the world. And it's really important that principals and support people and senior leadership team are kind of keeping a track of that. That they have an understanding of that there's that support around this. Teaching burns you out and kills you anyway. You know, not many teachers live to 120. So, you know, there's that. But the responsibility for principals as good employers and boards as good employers to ensure that those things are kept on top of, that they're understood, that there are systems in place which manage those kinds of issues are really, really important now.
Don't sweat the small stuff. You know, does it matter if something hasn't quite gone to plan or a piece of paperwork isn't done or whatever? Yeah. As Peter has said, these are extraordinary times. And so cut yourself a bit of slack, cut your colleagues a bit of slack. And so even thinking about, and I don't know if there are principals out there, but the school day doesn't necessarily have to run exactly to the timetable that it used to run. If breaks are a little bit longer and bells don't have to ring all the time and you have a little bit more flexibility to work with the children that you've got in front of you, use these opportunities. You know, the world is not going to collapse because you decide to do different things differently and put emotions first.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at all the questions coming through and we're just not going to get to them. And so I'm trying to pull out the ones that I think are kind of speaking to what do people need to know right now.
Mm.
You know, one of the really important ones coming through is that I get the sense that a lot of what you're talking about is that relational practice.
Mm.
One of the things that's going to complicate that, though, is that we're going to be heading into a time where the reliever pool is going to be really strained. Do you have any advice for what this looks like if you're a reliever working in somebody else's class?
Yeah, it was a significant issue in Christchurch, of course, as well after the earthquakes, in terms of, you know, the impacts that were happening and teachers not being available and the whole range of things. I think what it signals to me is that there are significant plans in place around the physical safety and health of children and staff when they go back to schools. Mm. And that actually what schools need to have in place are those kind of plans which sit right across the school, so that is thought about, that is worked out at a local level by schools in terms of those kinds of things. So there's been, you know, there's good significant advice around how you're going to manage different things when we go back, but that question will fall back to individual schools to manage and kind of work through, because frankly that advice isn't sort of, you know, hasn't been provided. Carol, do you?
No, I mean, I was thinking about the health system where, you know, retired doctors came back and so on. It just isn't going to work in the schooling system, is it? Because they are going to be many of our compromised people who may have retired because of either ill health or because of age and so on. As you say, that pool isn't going to be there. But I just, in looking at some of the comments there, somebody was sort of saying, well, how do you use your wider paraprofessional staff, you know, your teacher aides and your SENCOs and so on? Is there a way in which, as a school, you can pool all the resources that you do have and think about operating in different ways? What's really important for a child who started with a particular teacher at the start of the year to reconnect with that teacher, it might be that you work in more flexible ways in which will enable other people to, for the time being, to be part of the wider teaching team, so that you can manage some of these stresses in a way that you might not have thought of doing so before.
Yeah. Do you have any feedback or advice for those people that are working with kind of students in year 7 or 8 that are dealing with the kind of popularity and social impacts of being in a classroom at a time where it's probably quite healthy to be talking about your feelings and maybe some reluctance that they might have to do in that?
I've spent much of my teaching career working with year 7 and 8, so I kind of feel quite comfortable about answering that. young boys in particular find it really difficult to talk verbally about how they feel about themselves. And so one of the great things about fiction, one of the great things about the arts, is that they don't talk about themselves. They talk about someone inside the fiction and inside the story. So Te Rito Toi uses a lot of those kinds of devices to do that. The other thing that I know with year 7 and 8 is that sometimes it's up and moving and talking and moving, that you structure things differently. So it's not around sitting in the circle sharing feelings. I mean, that's a recipe in a lot of classrooms for an extraordinary amount of silence. That actually what you need to do is to create other kinds of spaces and other kinds of ways for that kind of thing to happen. And if you go into Te Rito Toi, there's lots of examples about how you can do exactly that kind of work for year 7 and 8. There's some lovely drama work where they're not performing, they're not out there in front, but they're thinking as if they're somebody else. And that capacity to do that work opens a whole range of processes. But it's interesting, it was a question that I had this afternoon from the school I was with, you know, that there's that whole kind of body image, identity stuff that's happening, and that makes it trickier at year 7 and 8.
But to come back to that idea of a point that Peter made earlier, which was about if you get their hands busy, that often their brain will start to talk about other things. And for those of you who's ever taught your teenager to drive, once they got behind the wheel and they were focusing on driving, you could ask them anything about girlfriends or, you know, had they ever tried marijuana or whatever, because these conversations came out the side while they were busy wondering about how I put this jolly thing into gear and so on. Same principle applies. Yeah, keep them safe, keep them active and so on, and eventually the conversations will come. And as Peter says, there's lots of great literature. And I did see a few people asking about where you might find Bear Goes Into Lockdown and so on. Well, if you do find Bear Goes Into Lockdown, I think the first 2 books are on Peter's site, and but I can always make the all 4 of them available. The good thing about picture books is they're not just for 5-year-olds. Good picture books have a sort of a 5-year-old level where it's cute, funny bear. But for example, in those particular stories, you know, Bear goes to talk to the sheep next door and says, the sheep, they won't take any notice of me. They think this COVID-19 is a bovine conspiracy. Well, that's not 5-year-old talk. So immediately you hook in, adults or older children by being able to see the layers in the picture book. And that's, you can get them to kind of unpack those kinds of things. So, yeah, keep them busy. And I think somebody said something about provide them with food. I guess you've got to be careful about that one because you have to bring your own lunch and stick with your own lunch these days.
Can I pick up on something, Liam, that I just saw flash across the bottom of the screen and from a comment, and I just thought they're right at one level and wrong at another. It's really important to go back and that schools have routine because there's safety in routines. That's really important, that, you know, that there are the kinds of things which schools do which provide a rhythm and a safety in the rhythm of the day. And kind of connecting back into that is absolutely important. But that doesn't mean that we shift our focus in terms of what it is that we're doing, that we look at curriculum material, the kinds of books that we're using, so that we're thinking about these big issues about how the world's changed, using the curriculum to do that, because that's what curriculum's about, isn't it? Well, one part of it is not just preparing kids for work, it's actually about helping them understand the world. So, yeah, absolutely. Have the routines, have those kinds of things, but that doesn't mean that we go back to what we were, because we can't. It's all changed. So, yep, absolutely establish those routines, the ways in which kids feel safe and comfortable inside those. but don't make the mistake that you'll go back and you'll pick up the book that you left 6 weeks ago, or go back and do that kind of stuff. You're going to be going, what are the big questions these kids come in with? And you work with that. That's, I think, what's really important.
And there'll be people who, have been using inquiry cycles and experiential learning and all those kinds of things. How do you take those pedagogical approaches that you already have that are about making sense of what's happening now, and how we socially cope, and how we think about what the future might be like, and how we layer environmental issues on top of all of these sorts of things? There's plenty of ways in which you can listen to the things that children have to say, and then help them unpack and explore them in really sound pedagogical ways. It's not about putting them back in front of their maths textbooks or whatever, but thinking that now you have that opportunity to really make a difference in terms of the kind of children and young people they're going to grow up to be.
Kia ora. At the end of this webinar, people are going to receive an email asking them if they are interested in hosting a meeting locally. What would you suggest that they do to kind of wrap some kind of purpose and action around these local meetings?
Carol?
Oh, well, I think it's coming back to the things that we said at the very beginning. I think the first meetings that you need to have are going back to those first principles, which is how are you going to look after each other? What strategies are you going to put in place to ensure that everybody's got everybody else's backs, and that you're looking out for each other, and you have good strategies in place, and you know where any support might be needed to get your staff up and running. And then going out from thinking of sort of staff as a bubble, thinking about your families, and in what ways are you going to connect out to them and reassure them that you're underway and you've got good processes, and that school will be a safe place. We've already talked about connecting with multilingual communities and so on, so that it's not just everything going out in English. Making sure that you're connecting with the people who need to do that, and then you'll be ready to start thinking about what will we do with children when they come back. So I think if you host your first couple of meetings, they should be before everyone gets back, and go, okay, let's do the focus on us, and then spreading out and thinking about who our community is, and then we'll start talking about what we're going to do when children come back. But I'll pass over to Peter there.
And when you start thinking about what it is that you're going to be doing in classrooms, have a look at Te Rito Toi. There's lots of we built it, we made it to be really practical. I'm like every teacher I know, a really practical person. If it works, I'll do it. So like I know that the people who wrote that, Ginny, Rawiri, Priya, everybody who wrote in that, we've all taught for a long time, and there's stuff in there that you'll go, great, I don't need to plan for 3 days. Yes, I've got this stuff and I can go to it and I can use it, and it's had the stamp from NZEI, Principals Federation, Uni, boom, UNESCO. Yeah, I'm going to go in there and, oh my God, look at this, I can do that. Give yourself that break of, all that planning stuff and do all that. So maybe there's some conversations as a staff around that, as people are poking around. And, I know lots of schools, because they've been in touch with me going, our whole school is going back through Te Rito Toi. The entire school's going through, and I'm going, fantastic. That's what we wanted. That's why we did the work. So, yep, look after yourself. And then when you're thinking about what you're going to do in the classroom, go, hey, that teaspoon of light looks really good. That I'm saying that because that's the one I wrote. But but whatever one it is that you like, you go, yep, that's me. Ha'ora, man. Look, I tell you what, if I was looking at it, the possibility of doing that. There's a unit of work there for year one, from level 1 and 2, all about breath and moving and breath together. It's the most beautiful Māori resource. Man, if I was a teacher going back next week with little ones, I'd be going, thank you, that's mine. I'll do that.
Very cool. Hey, we are coming to the end. I just wanted to offer both of you the opportunity. Is there any kind of like closing comment or kind of main point that you would like to bring us back to?
Pace yourself. Look after yourselves. Yeah, you are our most precious resource. So look after yourselves, look after each other, and everything else will fall into place, and it will be not what you expected and what you expected, and it will be shorter than you think and longer than you think. It will just be this journey that none of us can predict. So yeah, take care out there.
Yeah, trust yourselves. You know, like the level of expertise in the New Zealand teaching world is enormous. Trust yourself. Trust your professionalism. Trust you know what's important for the children that you care for. That'll get you through everything.
Oh, that is absolutely fantastic. Carol, Peter, thank you so much for what you have shared. And in the way that we are hoping these local meetings are going to go, you've ignited a conversation that can now be passed over to the educators of New Zealand and really follow through with the idea of what does this mean for us locally, teachers sharing with teachers. And as I've been following the chat, good teachers can't help themselves offering advice to others. And so it's been great to see that happening in the chat. And I really hope that today's conversation will spark that conversation back locally for them. I've also picked up that a number of people have been talking about industrial issues that relate to them personally. Please do contact NZEI at nzei.org.nz or the 0800 number 0800 693 443 because we have to find pathways through for you with those issues. But we are lucky that we are wrapping up 5 minutes early. Once again, a huge thank you to everybody that has signed up to be a part of this conversation. Please don't forget to pop over to the NZEI Facebook page to be a part of that initial discussion and then look out for that email around hosting local events. Once again, Carol, Peter, a huge thank you. To the 6 NZEI staff that are sitting in the background that have done an amazing job of pulling this all together. Thank you so much for the work that you do as well. There's been some real value in this last hour. Have a great evening and best of luck for next week. Ka kite.
Ka kite.